2025 might be the year I realized I was wrong about jazz. I thought I had a pretty clear sense of what the music sounded like. I mean, I follow new releases, I read reviews, I pay attention, and still, I miss some of the most interesting records of the year. Not because they were hidden, not because they were obscure, but because jazz right now is wider than any one list, chart, or conversation can capture. When I finally went back and really listened, what surprised me wasn't just how good these albums were, it was how different they all were from each other. They didn't point in any one direction. They pointed in 6 different approaches. So this isn't just about catching up or making a checklist. It's about rediscovering how big jazz still is. These are 6 albums I missed in 2025, and each one changed how I hear the music right now. Let's start with one that was probably my favorite out of these 6, and that was About Ghosts by Mary Halvorson. I came to About Ghosts because it kept appearing at or near the top of multiple Best of 2025 lists. And once I saw it show up in more than one place, I knew this wasn't just niche acclaim. This was a defining album of the year. Released in June 2025 on None Such Records, it features Mary Halvorson's Amaryllis Ensemble, Adam O'Farrell on trumpet, Jacob Garchick on trombone, Patricia Brennan on vibraphone, Nick Dunstan on bass, and Thomas Fujiwara on drums, with guest saxophonists Emmanuel Wilkins and Brian Settles on tenor. It was recorded in June 2024 at Sear Sound in New York and produced by John Dietrich. In interviews with Jazz Times, Halvorson described this album as an expansion of her ensemble writing, especially through the addition of saxophones, deepening the horn textures and widening the palette while maintaining clarity and flexibility between composed material and improvisation. For me, this feels like a bold, mature statement from a composer who knows exactly who she is and is fully claiming her place as one of the major voices in 21st century jazz. What's so powerful about this record is the way its structures are strong, but not beholden to traditional jazz forms. They're influenced by tradition, but not controlled by it. After a lifetime of studying jazz language, it is incredibly difficult to break away from those forms in a meaningful way, and About Ghosts succeeds at doing exactly that. There are deeply composed sections that show a unique approach to harmony and melody, but they are constantly balanced by freedom and how they are accompanied and how they evolve in performance. Even in the most structured moments, there is flexibility in the way the ensemble supports and reshapes the music, which keeps everything alive and breathing. To me, the defining quality of this album is its conversational nature. There are 7 musicians involved, which is a huge number of voices to balance without becoming crowded or chaotic, yet nothing ever feels congested. The ensemble uses restraint as a compositional tool. Simultaneous statements are carefully shaped, and space is treated as something just as important as sound. The instrumentation is crucial here. Vibraphone, guitar, bass, and drums with out piano leaves an enormous amount of harmonic space. That space can be filled with clarity or left intentionally ambiguous, giving the improvisation room to unfold in both precise and open-ended ways. The accompaniment feels especially powerful because of this balance between definition and suggestion. The horn writing is extraordinary. Amaryllis normally uses trumpet and trombone, but the addition of 2 saxophones allows the compositions to feel more fully realized and almost orchestral in their color and depth. The improvisation throughout the album is remarkable, ferocious at times, reflective and introspective at others, always serving the emotional arc of the music rather than virtuosity for its own sake. The group moves effortlessly between intensity and restraint, complexity and simplicity. Mary Halvorson's improvisational voice is one of the most distinctive in jazz today. You can hear that she has absorbed the language of players like Jim Hall and Joe Pass, but she has very consciously chosen not to imitate them. Instead, she has developed a sound that is unmistakably her own. Her use of effects is a perfect example of this. They are not there for surface level texture or novelty. They are part of her articulation, her phrasing, and her sense of time. They function as musical grammar, fully integrated into her improvisational language rather than added on top of it. About Ghosts is an essential listen. It's challenging, compelling, and deeply rewarding. It doesn't just present new music. It genuinely has the power to rewire how you think about jazz composition, ensemble writing, and improvisation. If Mary Halvorson shows what orchestral modern jazz can sound like, Nels Cline shows what happens when jazz opens itself fully to texture and tone. Released in 2025 on Blue Note Records, Consentrik Quartet from Nels Cline features Cline on guitars and effects, Ingrid Lobrock on tenor and soprano saxophone, Chris Lightcap on bass and electronics, and Tom Rainey on drums. And it was recorded at the Bunker in Brooklyn during sessions in 2024. What immediately stands out is that this feels like a true working quartet, not a leader plus sideman project. There's a strong collective identity here, a sense of a band that has developed a shared language over time. Downbeat framed it as one of Cline's most jazz-centric releases, grounded in post-bop language while still leaving room for experimental textures and electronic color. And All About Jazz emphasized the conversational nature of the music, especially between Cline and Lobrock, with Lightclap and Rainey functioning as a rhythm section that is elastic and flexible rather than rigidly timekeeping. Even though it didn't dominate top 10 lists the way some albums did, it lived in that adjacent space of deep critical respect and serious artistic credibility. What I love about this record is how fundamentally jazz it feels, even when the distortion appears or when the groove leans towards straight-eighth rock-inflected territory. It never feels like genre hopping. Instead, it feels like a unified musical language that simply contains jazz, experimental music, and rock within it. There are moments where it feels familiar enough that you could imagine playing parts of it from a lead sheet. But then those moments open into sophisticated arrangement and unexpected textures. Cline has an especially beautiful way of framing improvisation through composition. This isn't a traditional melody solo melody structure. You might hear a short burst of soloing, then lightly arranged ensemble writing, then open space again. It feels purposefully constructed, thoughtful, and deliberate. The band clearly loves structure, but they're never afraid of freedom. There are sections that are highly composed and others where they're simply exploring the moment. And the transitions between those states are some of the most exciting parts of this record. What really strikes me is how cohesive it all feels. Different textures constantly appear. Light cap, bowing long tones. Rainy, playing more conversational and fragmented rhythmic ideas instead of just holding down a groove. Labrock switching between saxophones. Cline shifting through a wide palette of guitar sounds. Yet, it never feels like someone steps forward just because they're doing something different. Everything feels in service of the piece or the moment. Whether these choices are fully composed or discovered in real time, they always sound intentional and conversational. I also love how aware Cline is of harmony and space. The guitar doesn't dominate harmony the way a piano can. It implies rather than controls. He uses that openness beautifully, letting the music breathe and leaving room for the rest of the band to shape the harmonic world together. At the same time, he isn't afraid to drop the band into a straight groove when it serves the music. And when he does, it feels natural and polished. This album, along with Mary Halvorson's work, really made me rethink the role of guitar in modern jazz. Early jazz guitar often borrowed heavily from piano language or focused on single-line bebop vocabulary. Today, the guitar carries decades of rock history, tone shaping, and textural experimentation. Distortion is no longer just an effect. It's a compositional color. Tone itself becomes part of the writing. Consentrik Quartet feels like a perfect example of what the guitar genuinely offers jazz in the 21st century. A way to blend harmony, texture, space, and genre influence into something that is deeply rooted in jazz while still sounding completely contemporary. And if that record redefines the guitar's role in jazz, Michael Wollny's trio completely rethinks the piano trio. I discovered Living Ghost because it appeared on a Best of 2025 list, and it immediately stood out as an outlier. Released in February 2025 on ACT Records, it documents a live concert from April 2024 in Germany by the Michael Wollny Trio. Michael Wollny on piano, Tim Lafrabe on bass, and Eric Schaefer on drums. The Guardian ranked it as the #1 jazz album of 2025, describing the performance as musical seances where fragments of familiar material appear and transform in real time without fixed set lists. And both Downbeat and All About Jazz emphasize that this album is less about repertoire and more about process. That feels exactly right to me. The record completely rethinks the piano trio tradition. When we think of the piano trio, we often think of the hard swing and virtuosity of the Oscar Peterson trio, or the conversational lyricism and subtle freedom of Bill Evans. This feels thoroughly modern by comparison, almost in the lineage of groups like the Bad Plus, but unmistakably its own thing. Each piece feels less like a concise composition and more like a journey through ideas, moods, and textures. Sometimes the idea isn't the destination, The searching itself is the point. You hear Flights of Freedom, where the trio is collectively looking for the next shape of the music. And while these pieces may be loosely planned, there's no clear moment where a song begins. They have to discover it together, which is part of the magic. Once those ideas emerge, the music becomes incredibly rich and varied. Shifting time signatures, reflective and moody passages, funky grooves, and even moments that nod towards more traditional swing, all unified by the trio's aesthetic. It never feels like a piano solo with rhythm section. It feels genuinely collective. You can hear Wollny's voice as a leader, but never in a way that suggests the others are simply accompanying him. It's more like someone guiding the journey at a given moment while the trio moves forward together. There's rarely a sense of taking a solo. Instead, the music unfolds as a shared exploration. Harmonically, Wollny uses dissonance as a tool, stepping outside and sometimes revolving, sometimes not. And that tension becomes emotionally powerful. It mirrors life in a way where not all distances are meant to be immediately closed. I also love the subtle use of electronics, which never disrupts the acoustic nature of the group, but blends into the texture as another color. The trio moves effortlessly from intimacy to intensity, from reflective to joyful, from restraint to near triumph. This is a record that only makes sense as a live document. You can feel the risk, the discovery, the trust, and the deep listening between the musicians. It's a journey the listener is invited to take with them, and it's one I find completely beautiful. The next album shows what happens when deep tradition and deep accessibility meet. Artemis lives in a different space altogether, a band that speaks fluently to both critics and radio without compromising either. Arboresque is the album that truly lives in both worlds for me. The critics' best of 2025 lists and the Jazz Week year-end chart. Released in February 2025 on Blue Note Records, it features Artemis as a permanent quintet with Renee Rosnes on piano and musical direction, Ingrid Jensen on trumpet, Nicole Glover on tenor saxophone, Noriko Ueda on bass, and Allison Miller on drums. Jazz Times framed the album through organic imagery, with the title referring to branching forms and interconnected musical ideas. And that feels like a perfect metaphor for how this record unfolds. Each member contributes original compositions, reinforcing Artemis as a true collective rather than a leader-centric project. All About Jazz emphasized the balance between tightly written material and adventurous improvisation, while WBJO highlighted Artemis not only as an important musical project, but as a culturally significant one. On the Jazz Week year-end chart, Arboresque finished at number 2, showing massive radio support alongside critical respect. What makes this album so powerful to me is that it proves accessibility doesn't require compromise. Many of these tunes are beautifully arranged, clearly defined, and deeply rooted in the jazz tradition in a way that works for radio and wider audiences. But none of it ever feels commodified or generic. There is nothing commercialized about the music. Instead, there's a sense of joy, vitality, and strong personality running through the entire record. It's deeply jazz, deeply personal, and full of conviction. Most of the album is original music, and hearing each band member's compositional voice gives the record a wonderful sense of diversity. That variety keeps the album alive and moving forward, and it allows each musician to shift naturally between the roles of leader and supporter. It feels truly collaborative and deeply committed. The rhythm section is extraordinary. Noriko Ueda and Allison Miller can move from traditional swing to modern grooves in an instant, and it always feels organic. Allison Miller keeps the music grounded while constantly interacting, pushing, and shaping the momentum with taste and authority. Renee Rosnes brings an elegance and openness to the harmony that elevates everything. There's a clarity and beauty to her playing that feels both refined and emotionally generous. She doesn't dominate the space, she opens it, giving the band room to breathe and respond. Together, this rhythm section creates a foundation that is flexible, powerful, and endlessly musical. I also love how the album treats repertoire. Their version of Wayne Shorter's Footprints doesn't fall into the trap of becoming a loose jam. It's thoughtfully arranged with strong melodic shaping and clear direction, while still leaving space for inspired improvisation. And then there's What the World Needs Now, which is usually the kind of track that makes me nervous on a jazz record. But here, it's handled with such care and imagination. They turn it into a jazz waltz, add subtle reharmonization, and preserve the emotional message of the song while speaking it in their own language. It becomes sincere, personal, and genuinely moving rather than sentimental or gimmicky. Ultimately, Arboresque is captivating. It's beautifully written, beautifully played, and full of life. The musicianship is outstanding. The ensemble identity is strong, and the music feels both welcoming and substantial. That balance explains why it found such a wide audience while also earning serious critical acclaim. Artemis proves that you can make music that is sophisticated, honest, and deeply rooted in jazz tradition while still being accessible and engaging. It's an amazing group, and this album makes me want to experience them live because everything about it suggests that the energy and connection would be even more powerful in person. Where Artemis balances accessibility and depth, Cyrus Chestnut reminds us how powerful tradition still is on its own terms. I came to Rhythm, Melody, and Harmony through the Jazz Week year-end chart, where it finished at number 1, making it the most played jazz album on the radio in 2025. Released in April 2025 on High Note Records, it featured Cyrus Chestnut with Stacy Dillard on saxophones, Gerald Cannon on bass, and Chris Beck on drums, and was recorded in June 2024 at Sear Sound in New York. Downbeat placed the album firmly in the straight-ahead tradition, emphasizing Chestnut's deep swing feel, blues-infused language, and clarity of touch, while All About Jazz framed it as a record grounded in fundamentals, groove, melody, and harmonic clarity, exactly as the title suggests. For me, this is a beautifully executed and intentionally safe album. It speaks the language of jazz fluently and confidently without trying to reinvent anything. Everything about it is played at an extremely high level. The band swings hard, the sound is polished, and the musical conversation is clear and direct. That sense of safety is almost certainly a major reason why it dominated radio play. It's the kind of record that sounds great in any context, on the air, in the car, or as an introduction to straight ahead jazz for newer listeners. After spending time with so many experimental and boundary pushing albums, this one can feel a little dry by comparison, but that really isn't a flaw. It's more a reminder of what traditional jazz can sound like when it's done exceptionally well. This album doesn't take many risks, and it doesn't try to push the edges of the form. It stays firmly in its lane, but it knows that lane incredibly well. There is confidence in that restraint and a deep respect for the tradition it represents. One moment that stood out to me was Song of the Andes, which felt especially tightly arranged and thoughtfully constructed. It showed that even within a conservative framework, there's room for detail, shape, and invention. Then there's Chestnut's version of Autumn Leaves, which sits comfortably in 5/4. The whole record reflects that level of professionalism and care. These are musicians who understand the tradition deeply and honor it through clarity, feel, and precision. Rhythm, melody, and harmony may not be about risk-taking or redefining jazz, but it doesn't need to be. It succeeds by doing something timeless extremely well. And in a year filled with adventurous and experimental releases, it serves as a grounding reminder that straight-ahead jazz, when played at this level, still connects powerfully with listeners and still deserves its place at the center of the conversation. And then there's an album that refuses to choose just one direction. I came to Jeremy Pelt's Woven because it placed high on the Jazz Week year-end chart, finishing at number 3, and then noticed it also appeared on some of the best of 2025 lists that immediately told me it was resonating with both critics and radio. Released in January 2025 on High Note Records, the album features Jeremy Pelt on trumpet, Misha Mendelenko on guitar, Jalen Baker on vibraphone, Leighton Harrell on bass, and Jared Spears on drums, with guests Marie-Anne Hedonia on synthesizer and Mar Vilaska on vocals. WBGO featured it on New Day, New Play, and Pelt described the title as referring to weaving acoustic jazz language with electric and ambient textures. Jazz Times framed it as part of his ongoing expansion of instrumentation while still staying grounded in strong post-bop roots. And Stereo Gum highlighted how the vibraphone and guitar frontline, along with the subtle electronics, add atmosphere without replacing the core acoustic jazz language. What fascinates me most about this album is its internal contrast. Taken as a whole, it's almost 2 records living inside one. The opening immediately signals something different. Trumpet with effects over vibraphone, followed by vocal textures that feel looped or atmospheric, and then a bold, almost quasi-funk groove that really grabs your attention. At that point you think, okay, where is this going? But then the album settles into a much more subdued and restrained space. Most of the record lives in a softer world, medium and slow swing tempos, contemporary straight-eighth grooves, and beautifully crafted arrangements that feel understated and elegant. The instrumentation plays a huge role in this. With drums, bass, guitar, and vibraphone, no piano, and no additional horns, the sound is light, transparent, and gentle. The guitar often sits clean and in the background. The vibraphone provides color rather than density, and it leaves a lot of space for Pelt's melodic voice. His playing here is controlled, lyrical, and unforced. He's not aggressive. He's shaping long, beautiful lines that feel introspective and patient. It's easy to hear why this part of the album dominated radio play. It's melodic, accessible, and quietly sophisticated. But then, the final 2 tracks completely change the narrative. Interlude number 2 brings Pelt back with his trumpet more boldly processed, sounding exploratory and searching. And from there, the album explodes into something that feels almost like a Miles Davis electric era homage. Distorted guitar, a heavy repetitive groove, a 1-chord vamp, and Pelt playing with real fire and aggression. It immediately recalls the spirit of Jack Johnson or Bitches Brew, where intensity and raw energy took center stage. As a contrast to what came before, it's shocking in the best possible way. And then the album closes with a burning swing tune, fast, busy, and charged with energy. The tempo is flying, the drums are driving hard, and Pelt delivers some of his most exciting playing on the entire album. In many ways, these last 2 tracks feel like the emotional and artistic climax of the album. This contrast is what makes Woven so compelling, but it also made me think deeply about how people listen to music now. In the streaming era, many listeners may only encounter the softer, more radio-friendly tracks and never experience their dramatic shift at the end. They could love this album with ever hearing one of its most powerful artistic statements. I'll admit, I'm a bit old-fashioned in that I still listen to albums from beginning to end, and Woven really rewards that kind of listening. The quieter material is beautifully conceived and executed, but it's the eruption into fusion, energy, and then into hard swing that makes the full journey feel complete. It's almost like Pelt is reminding us that all of these words, lyricism, atmosphere, groove, aggression, and tradition, can coexist inside one artistic statement. What surprised me the most wasn't that I missed these albums, it was how much they changed the way I listened once I finally gave them my full attention. Each one reminded me that jazz isn't moving in one direction, it's moving in many directions at once. Sometimes quietly, sometimes boldly, sometimes right past us if we're not careful. These records didn't just fill gaps in my listening, they reshaped my sense of what jazz can be right now. They reminded me that the music is bigger than habits, bigger than playlists, bigger than whatever slice of the scene we happen to be paying attention to. So this isn't just a list of things I missed. It's a reminder to stay curious, to keep listening past what's familiar, because jazz in 2025 wasn't shrinking, it was expanding. And these 6 albums helped me hear that clearly. Have you heard these albums? I want to know. Put your thoughts down in the comments, and if there's any other albums I missed, tell me. I want to check them out. See you next time.